All right, this morning we're going to be in Ruth and 1st and 2nd Samuel. So combining them together, let's just get an explanation out there already. So I have an outline here of Ruth, different than the one that you probably have. This one's the same as the one you have, and this one's a little bit different, more simplified. But the connection between Ruth and Samuel is David. And we don't often think about that. We don't often think about David as it comes to the book of Ruth. That's where the book of Ruth ends. The book of Ruth serves as a transition between the period of the Judges and the period of the Kings. And the period of the Kings is obviously trying to get to David. David is the central figure in both of those. So it's kind of like this is the prequel, and then Samuel, 1st and 2nd Samuel is the movie. So David is the key link between both of them, and it kind of shows that it spans a transitional period. So Ruth is the pre-monarchy period. Samuel himself, the prophet, straddles both the judges and the kings, and then David is the main focus of the kings. Obviously, we have to deal with Saul as well, which we'll talk about. But that's why they're lumped together in that way. An interesting factor to note is that would still be known, and Ruth tips. You know what she's going to be talking about, or rather the author is going to be talking about through Ruth, because she says at the time of the Judges at the beginning of the book that this story has happened. So it's set in, that's where it happens. And in our Bibles, it falls right between Judges and Samuel. But in the Jewish Bible, they put Ruth at the end of Proverbs. So Ruth comes after that because she's supposed to be the ideal Proverbs 31 woman. Like she is the woman who goes and gleans in the field. She's the woman who's steadfast, who's faithful, who trusts in the Lord and all that stuff. So she's supposed to be the image of that. And even when they put Ruth there in the list of books of the Bible, in the Jewish Bible, they're still looking to her as spanning the gap, or rather her book, spanning the gap between the period of the Judges and the Kings. So what we're going to have to do this morning, just for the sake of time, is we're not going to get to spend this much time in Ruth. This is an extensive outline. It's really helpful, really good. You can learn. There's so much to be pulling out of Ruth. In fact, I probably studied Ruth more this week than I did 1st and 2nd Samuel, just because there's so much interesting redemptive history stuff in there. Like, how do we get to where we were? And then the imagery of Ruth being a Gentile, being grafted in to the lineage of the Messiah. She's an image of us, the church, being grafted in. So there's a whole lot of good stuff there. But what Ruth is, we'll begin with Ruth, and then we'll move to Samuel, 1st and 2nd Samuel. What Ruth is, as far as genre of Scripture, it's not a, some people have called it a novella before, but that insinuates it's fiction. Like it's a small novel, the story, characters are not real. It's not that. It's a short story, but it has an apologetic focus. And when I say apologetic, don't think of like it's proving that God exists, or like when we think of apologetics, we think of like arguing as a Christian. Apologetic meaning like that has a reason for existing. And it's trying to explain or give an answer for an apology, an argument for something. And that argument is for the kingship of David. That's what Ruth is all about, building towards that reality. So that's what Ruth is. It's a short story with an apologetic focus. It's a prelude to King David. It takes place at the time of the Judges. Look at chapter 1, verse 1. So we read chapter 1, verse 1 of Ruth.
Okay. In the days when the Judges ruled, there was a famine in the land. And a man from Bethlehem in Judah, together with his wife and 2 sons, went to live for a while in the country of Moab.
In the days of the Judges, so that's when it's set. Judges. So what are we supposed to remember about the Judges? What period? What time period is that? What feeling should that evoke in us? Thinking of Judges.
A terrible feeling.
Terrible feeling. That's right. Chaos, disorder. Everyone's doing what's right in their own eyes. There's no king in the land. What the refrain happens in chapter 17 onwards. There's no king, and everybody's doing whatever they want. And this book starts out no differently, right? It's the time of the Judges. There's a famine in Bethlehem. And so what do the people do who live in Bethlehem? In verse 2 we know his name's Elimelech. What do? They leave. Yeah. So the book starts off with sin. you're sinning, and so God sent a famine in your land, because it's supposed to be the promised land flowing with milk and honey. It's not doing that, and the only reason it wouldn't be that fruitful is because of the sin of the people. And so then the people who were leading off with, how do they respond to that? We'll leave. Instead of obeying the covenant of God, staying in the land, we're going to leave and go somewhere else. The land of Moab. The land of Moab is where they were before they came in, right? Remember, that's Deuteronomy. They're on the plains of Moab, and they're getting spoken to, all that stuff. So you're going to go out of the land of promise. You're going to leave God's covenant place. And that's where you're going to find help. That's where you're going to find hope, outside of the plan and the will of God. So it doesn't start out very good. So what we're going to see in the book of Ruth is in this swirling time of the judges of just sin and repetition of sin, repentance, and then sin again and punishment, and cry out to God, and then they just keep going through that cycle. That there's this kind of side story that's happening. That even in that time period, God still is removing redemptive history along the tracks, and that God is going to have a kinsman redeemer. That's a main thread of the book of Ruth, is a kinsman redeemer. Right here, kinsman redeemer. We know it's going to be Boaz. And so the question would be, studying the book of Ruth, is, has God forgotten? Has God forgotten his people? Has he forgotten his promise? We're going to see that no, even God is sovereignly directing all things, including trials, for his people, and he's going to redeem his people through a redeemer, a kinsman redeemer, a kinsman king. So in Ruth's life, there's two major days that come for her. The day that she's fed and the day that she's wed. She's fed by Boaz, and then she's wed to Boaz. And that's kind of the big main events in her life that we see and follow throughout all of it. But she's wed in chapters 3 and 4. Boaz maintains the family line. We'll get to kind of what that means here in a little bit. We'll see some snapshots into the story. But first, let's kind of just move through the story into the first snapshot. And the first one is the bitterness of sin in chapter 1. Chapter 1, 11 through 12. Somebody do that and then read verse 20.
But Naomi said, "Return, my daughter, why should you go with me? Have I yet sons in my womb, that they may be your husbands? Return, my daughters, go, for I am too old to have a husband. If I said I have hope, if I should even have a husband tonight, and also bear sons."
And read verse 20 also.
She said to them, "Do not call me Naomi, call me Mara, for the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me."
Almighty has dealt bitterly with me. So Naomi starts out grumpy, to say the least, right? She is bitter. And what does she tell? So in case we have to skim through the story, but her daughters-in-law are Orpah and Ruth, and they're who her sons married when they went to Moab. So these are not Jewish women; these are Moabite women. And so Naomi's husband died, who let them out there, and then her sons die, and so now she is a destitute woman, and she's just going to go back home and essentially just die in her mind. Because that's what a woman would have to have done in those days. Like, they were just essentially destitute. To be a widow and have no other family around was essentially a death sentence. So she's going to go back and just do that. So she says, "Y'all just go." And then she says, "I'm bitter." She calls herself Mara. Don't call me Naomi. Naomi is a name that kind of connotes God's blessing and favor and peace and happiness. She says, "Don't call me that. Call me Mara." Do you remember where we've seen the word Mara before in the Old Testament?
There's bad water.
Bad water, right? When the Israelites are wandering in the wilderness, and we call this place Mara because it's bitter. And then God tells Moses, "Hey, pick up that stick and throw it in there, and it turns water sweet." And so bitterness is what she says that she's done. And why is she bitter? Because the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. So she's kind of picking a fight with God. She's saying God's dealt cruelly with me. This isn't maybe very fair. But if you look at it, you're like, well, you are complicit in sin. We look at Naomi like, oh no, like she just got a bad shake in life, but she followed and went with her sinful husband out of a sinful land to take a sinful response to go to Moab, where there is no God of Israel, there is only sin. So you chose to do all of those things. Like you rejected the covenant, and God was faithful to his word. So there is a sense where like she's in a hard place, but it's not like that everything just kind of shook out bad on chance. There is sin involved, but God is not all justice and no mercy. He's going to overwhelm her with mercy because she told her daughters-in-law to leave. Orpah takes her up on it, but Ruth says this. Somebody read chapter 1, 16 and 17.
But Ruth said, "Do not urge me to leave you, or to return from following you. For where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord do so to me, and more also of me, but death parts me from you."
So Ruth takes this step of faith. She's going to stay with her mother-in-law. She has no reason to do. She had more hope of survival staying in Moab where her family is. But she says, I'm going to go with another destitute woman who has no way to earn an income to a place that I've never been before. I'm going to follow her. And the reason why is because she believes Naomi's God to be the one true God, that the God of Israel is the one true God. So she's going to go with her. She said she's going to stay faithful to her. So God's showing Naomi mercy in this by having Ruth go with her. And he's going to redeem both of them through one God. And that's kind of the next big snapshot. We're having to skip a whole lot of the outline of Ruth because we got a lot to cover. But the idea of the kinsman redeemer, that's what comes up in chapters 2, 3, and 4. It comes from Leviticus 25, and what's usually in context for is buying a family member out of slavery. But it would also have this connotation that became to be customary in the world of the Old Testament was if a male relative dies, then another male relative can take the wife to be his spouse, so then to carry on the name and the heritage and the inheritance of the dead family member, the dead male, the dead husband. That was the idea, to redeem, and then also to provide for the women. But it wasn't obligatory. You didn't have to do it. It wasn't like you got to do this thing, but it was still highly valued as a custom. And we see in Ruth 4, we'll skip around to that, Ruth 4, 9, and 10. Boaz is going to be this, because it says in those verses, Then Boaz said to the elders and all the people, You are witnesses this day that I have bought from the hand of Naomi all that belonged to Elimelech and all that belonged to Chilion and to Mahlon. So those are her true sons, Chilion and Mahlon. Also Ruth the Moabite, the woman of Mahlon, the widow of Mahlon, I have bought to be my wife, to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance, that the name of the dead may not be cut off from among his brothers from the gate of his native place. You are witnesses this day. So he's the Redeemer. He steps in and does the job of a kinsman Redeemer. So God's display of mercy to Ruth is just that, is mercy. And the marriage is the second step of mercy. That he's not only going to redeem her, but he's going to marry her. So let's read, and it's not just going to bless her, it's going to bless the whole nation. Somebody read, well, let's get two people to read 13 through 17 in chapter 4. So somebody read the first 3 verses, somebody read the next 2 verses.
So Boaz took Ruth, the king's wife, and he went in to her. And the Lord gave her conception, and she bore a son. Then the woman said to Naomi, Blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without a redeemer, and may his name be renowned in Israel.
You will renew your life and sustain you in your old age. Indeed, your daughter-in-law who loves you is better than you than 7 sons of birth. Naomi took the child, placed him on her lap, and took care of him. Abel, Clement, said, Your son blessed him, and they named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David.
Father Jesse, the father of David. And then the last 3 verses, or 4 verses, are the longer lineage of David. So we've had to skip over a ton of the details in Ruth. There's so much there to glean out, upon our words particularly, because she gleans the fields. There's a lot to glean out of there, a lot of symbolism, a lot of great stuff. But look at, as we kind of close out Ruth, the layers of God's sovereign grace as it goes throughout. That God is sovereignly providing for, mercifully providing for Naomi and Ruth. that you show up into a hometown and God has this perfect guy there, Boaz, who is wealthy. And then Bethlehem is apparently back into a season of faithful following because there's no longer a famine. And Boaz has tons of crops he's able to share. Remember, Naomi's family left because there was no food. So now there is. So now they've come back in a time of blessing. So God provides for Naomi and Ruth, food-wise, so they're doing well. And then it not only provides that, like, hey, we have kind of somebody to mooch off of during harvest season. No, let's just go ahead and make this a full-on redemptive scenario. So to provide you for a lifetime. And so Naomi leaves a place of emptiness somewhat full, and she comes back to a place of fullness somewhat empty. And then God's going to fill her up and give her a son. The last scene is her bouncing Obed on her knee. She does have hope. She does have a son. She does have a way to be provided for. And so does Ruth as well. So but in that, so God, that's the first layer. He does take care of those two individual women. But he doesn't do that at the expense of the grand plan of narrative history, or of redemptive history, narrative throughout the whole Bible. Because they were to get to David. So now we have David. Now David can be the good king in the land. David can be the example that we're supposed to get to, and we'll get to here in a minute. But even David's not the main point of all of this. Jesus is the main point of all of this. So these layers of sovereign grace that he does care for, those individual women, he's not just using them as pawns to get to David, to get to Jesus. He's caring for them. But they are engrafted into the plan. That we got to have you to get to David. To get David. Not just David to bless the land of Israel and to bless the people who are Jewish and to provide for them and to set up the kingdom and all that stuff. That is true and will happen. But the greater purpose is to get to Jesus. So there's these layers of God's sovereignty that we see just in this own story here. And we're eventually going to get to a future Redeemer King who is completely perfect through Ruth, through Boaz, and through David. So that kind of leads us naturally into the book of Samuel, 1st and 2nd Samuel, that we get brought into. This is a transition to the king. That Samuel, the book starts out with Samuel, so it's just Samuel's story. And he's this pivotal figure. We don't often acknowledge that what he is that he's a prophet and a priest and a judge. So he's the last judge from the period of the judges. And then he's also a priest. He serves in that priestly function. He's also a prophet. All the other prophets that come after Samuel, they look back to Samuel. He's kind of that role where because Samuel, once there's a king now, Samuel's role transitions. He's kind of the prophet advisor to the king. He's telling Saul, what are you doing? When he goes and anoints David and kind of advises David until he dies in chapter 25. So Samuel is this hinge point in the scriptures where things are transitioning away from this kind of tribalistic period of the judges where it's a lot of chaos to a more formalized government with a monarchy, with a king, a royal lineage, that kind of situation. So Samuel plays in that role in a huge way, and he anoints the nation's first king, anoints the nation's best king. And Samuel, Ruth and Samuel, we suppose that Samuel wrote Ruth and Judges, and then he wrote 1 Samuel through chapter 25, because that's when he dies. And after that, we don't know who writes the rest of the other 9 chapters in 1 Samuel and 2 Samuel. But they were just, in the Hebrew Bible, it's just one book. 1 and 2 Samuel are just one book. They're not divided. We divide it up, I guess, because we can't handle that long of a narrative, but it's all the same. Written by Samuel mostly, and then by what we would have to just admit is unknown. There are good people to assume. They could be Nathan and Gad. They were prophets. 1 Chronicles 29 would let us believe that. I think that's probably most likely, rather than just saying some random person. The theme of 1 and 2 Samuel is going to be God ruling his people through a representative of the people, and that God's going to take the actions of that king. We set up a monarchy, and the nation's going to be treated according to how that king leads. Because he's going to be the representative. So if it's Saul, then the nation's going to be treated and punished. If it's David and he's following God, it's going to be blessed and watched over. So that's how it's going to do. And the question still goes, does God still care? In all of these things, does God still care about us? Is he still watching us if we're the people of Israel? So the overview of 1st and 2nd Samuel, follow it down. Samuel's story is just him as a kid growing up, and then it transitions to a monarchy. So we get Saul in there. He gets anointed, and then he sins, and then he gets condemned 2 times in 13 and 14. Then we get Saul versus, so 16 through 31 is David's on the scene now, but he's being run around by Saul. He's like, they're kind of going in and out. It's like, so one day Saul is like, yeah, I want you to be in my house and play songs when I'm grumpy. And then the next day, I'm trying to throw a spear through your heart and stick you to the wall. So he's kind of going in and out constantly. And then he's like, okay, well, I'm sorry. I'll make you a commander of my army. And then, well, now I'm going to hunt you until I can kill you. And you're going to hide in the woods. So that's how the book of 1 Samuel ends. That he's still not king. David's still not king. And Saul's still alive. At the very end of it, he dies. And the death narrative carries over even to 2 Samuel. And then David finally gets established as king in the first 20 chapters, and then the end of David's life, which kind of is this fumbling of a couple of rebellions, and then his second great sin where he takes a census. And it's not the census that's his great sin, it's his pride. Like, I want to know how great I was at the end of my life. It's not like, hey, I want to help God out by formalizing who we are. So then 2 Samuel ends. A shorter alternative outline, if you want to remember, is it just goes Samuel, Saul, David. Breaks down into focusing on 3 men, which is essentially true. That's an easy way to look at it and think about it. Like, those are the main focus of the people, even though the characters will bleed over those lines, that they're not the main focus of those different sections.
So I have a question.
Yes.
If the emphasis was in Ruth about David, why was Saul chosen as king?
That's a great question. We're going to get to that question. Because why, if he's mentioned as that, but then we still have to get through, because Saul, or Ruth is obviously written with David. We know who David is, so it's written at some period later. It wasn't like happening live. So Samuel writing it, obviously knowing that David is going to be the king. So it's written at least by the time that David's anointed king, because he's mentioned at the end of the book, and not Saul. So it's trying to get to David, but there's this hiccup in the middle of the way. A hiccup on our perspective, but not on God's. So before we get into getting in kingship and all of that, there's some theological themes in 1st and 2nd Samuel that we got to make sure we note out. And 1st and 2nd Samuel are probably we're most familiar with a lot of those stories, especially as men, because we like all the fighting and the wars and David and Goliath. We know that, and that narrative or that story kind of permeates all of society. I mean, there'll never be a day or a month or a year where there's not a David and Goliath story on ESPN. We all kind of acknowledge that we know that story. But what we can do with all of these crazy stories about, like, well, you got to have a Saul in your life to kind of make you sharp and strong. So don't get mad because there's a Saul in your life. Or you got to go out there and sling the stone of faith at your own personal Goliath. That we can misapply the points of all of those stories in 1st and 2nd Samuel and take them out of their theological meaning and just make them kind of moralistic fables that we all kind of like. Now, how does that transition to you? That we can make ourselves to be David or make ourselves to be Samuel. When that's not the point. The point of it is what is God's name being done about? Like, so David and Goliath, it's not about killing the giant in your life. It's really about is that God chooses a king who prevails. That it's a kid who goes out there and crushes an invincible foe. That when God chooses a king, he doesn't lose. It's also about how Israel's God is truly great. Because what's David repudiate Goliath for saying? For mocking God. And you're like, you don't get to mock God. God mocks you. That's why David runs out there. He's not going to go like, hey, I'm going to go save the people. He's like, no, I'm going to go defend and prove God's name to be true. Like, God's being insulted and blasphemed. I'm just going to go show him that you can't do that. You don't get to do that. Also because David doesn't care for himself. So it's the Philistines. Remember, Samson fights the Philistines, and how does he always fight the Philistines in the book of Judges? Very pridefully. Look what I'm going to do. Hey, you guys hurt my feelings when you guessed my joke. I mean, that's literally what Samson does. You guess my riddle, so I'm going to burn your town down. David's like, hey, you're insulting the God of the Bible. You have to go down. And God will help me do it. So he's the selfless Savior who's looking out for the name of God and for the good of the people, not for his own pride. Samson, God just kind of uses Samson's pride to protect the people in certain ways. But David's truly selfless. So these two themes that we're going to look at throughout 1st and 2nd Samuel are kingship and rest. The first one being kingship. Look at what the people demand in 1 Samuel 8. So I'm going to get there and read 19 and 20.
But the people refused to obey the voice of Samuel, and they said, "No, but there shall be a king over us, that we also may be like all the nations, and that our king may judge us and go out before us and fight our battles."
We want a king. To be like what?
Everybody else.
The nations. We want a king to be like the nations. And then God, Samuel's mad about this, but God says in verse 7 of that same chapter, he says, "Obey the voice of the people and all that they say to you, for they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me from being king over them." So Samuel's like, what are they doing? And you can see how he could take it a little bit personally because he's not a king. He's a judge. He's a priest. But it kind of has this blended, I'm mad at them for wanting this. But God's like, no. The main thing is that they rejected me. So give them what they want, and I will give them a king like the nations. Because their sin is not wanting a king. Their sin is wanting a king to be like the nations. Because we know from Deuteronomy 17 and 18 that God does, in his law, provide outlines and descriptors for what a king should be like. This is what a king should be like. But they don't come and say, hey, it looks like we want to just entreat you as the God of the Bible, the God of the covenant that you have given us. We seem to be out of order. We have this tribal identity and we keep sinning. We need somebody to help kind of codify us to worship you better. We need one, and we need a lineage of them so they keep remaining, a stability of government so that we can worship you better. Can we begin that process, God? They could have come like that, but they don't. They just come throwing a fit, saying, we want a king. We want to look like our neighbors. I want the clothes that the other kids in the neighborhood have. That's what it is. I want to blend in with them. I want to look like them. And so God says, okay, well, I'll give you what you want. I'll give you exactly a king like the nations. You'll get what you want. Remember, isn't that what he does throughout the whole book of Judges as well? He just lets them do what they want. Like we don't want this God. We want another God who's going to let us sleep with whoever we want, or eat however much we want, or do whatever we want. We want that God. And he says, okay, have that God. And then the punishment that comes along with it. Like that life does not lead to happiness. That does not lead to covenant blessing. So that's what he does with them when he gives them Saul. They're supposed to be a light to the world, but they want to be just like everybody else. So you kind of see this pattern in the book of 1st and 2nd Samuel. It's like X's. That when somebody's in the incline, another leader is on the decline. So when Eli, at the beginning of the book, is on the decline as prophet, Samuel's on the incline. And when Samuel's on the incline, Saul's on the decline, Saul's on the incline. When Saul's on the decline, David's on the incline. And then when David's on the decline, Solomon is on the incline. So it's kind of these crossing leadership thing all over throughout, not just kings, but even going back to Eli and Samuel, that it kind of just has this pattern of God's taking one down, he's raising up another. And none of the leaders, it's important to note, none of the leaders in 1st and 2nd Samuel are good all the way through. Even David. Even Samuel. Like Samuel is awesome, and he's this pillar of biblical fidelity, but his sons are awful. And they're the reason that people ask for a king. You see the whole pattern kind of break down or kind of appear in chapter 3 of 1 Samuel. In 19 and 20. Somebody read those.
Lord was with Samuel as he grew up, and he let none of his words fall to the ground. And all Israel from Dan to Beersheba recognized that Samuel was attested as a prophet of the Lord.
So they know Samuel's a prophet. Eli's on the decline. Because in verse 14, we just read that first, but chapter 3, verse 14, it says, "Therefore I swear to the house of Eli that the iniquity of Eli's house shall not be atoned for by sacrifice or offering forever." So Eli's going to be punished. And that's the story that we all tell our kids when we open up the storybook Bible, where Samuel runs, he hears the voice of God in the middle of the night, he runs to Eli. "Did you call for me?" He goes, "No, it was me." And then, "Did you call for me?" "No, it wasn't me." "Did you call for me?" "No, it was God." Listen to what God said. So then we don't ever finish that story. It just kind of shows Samuel being excited and going, "Oh, God's okay." But what does God say to him in that moment? He tells him, "Hey, the guy that you live with, I'm going to punish him and he's going to be annihilated. And so are his 2 sons." That's what God told a boy. And we look at it like he just told him, "Hey, you're a sweet kid, Samuel. Just want to let you know in the middle of the night that I think that about you." Oh, he says, "Hey, here's a message of judgment." And then Eli's waiting. "Hey, come back and tell me what God said." So now you're the little boy, Samuel. And you're going to have to go, "Hey, God said that you're going to get killed, and so are your 2 sons because of your faithlessness to him." That's how the story really goes. And so Samuel becomes the prophet, right? But then Samuel raises sons who are corrupt. Look at chapter 8. So let me read verses 1 through 3 of chapter 8. Or just, 1 through 3.
Came about when Samuel was old that he appointed his sons judges over Israel. Now the name of his firstborn was Joel, and the name of his second Abijah. They were judging in Beersheba. His sons, however, did not walk in his ways, but turned aside after dishonest gain and took bribes and perverted justice.
So he's not a great dad, and his kids are not great. They're awful. So then they're on the way. So Samuel now is on the way down. Saul comes up, chapter 10, verse 1. Then Samuel took a flask of oil and poured it on his head and kissed him and said, "Has not the Lord anointed you to be prince over his people Israel? You shall reign over the people of the Lord, and you will save them from the hand of their surrounding enemies, and this shall be the sign that the Lord has anointed you to be prince over his heritage." So Saul's coming up. But in all these transitions, if you're paying attention and you're reading your Bible honestly in the first 10 chapters of this book, you start thinking at some point, is this kingship even going to work? Because the guys leading up to the kings aren't working. And it seems like every time, even the guy God puts in there doesn't do so good. So having a king, is that going to make it any better? Is that going to really do anything that's going to be any good? The people of Israel asked for the king, so they're going to get one that they asked for. And they're asking for the king because they want rest. They see the judges aren't working, and so they think that we'll just take the control into our hands. So we want rest and we want peace. So let's just get a king like everybody else. That'll be what brings it to us. And it's not going to be what brings it to them.
Hey, Stu.
Yep.
Why do you believe there was such a challenge in raising godly kids? Because it doesn't seem like there's any example, at least in the Old Testament that I can see, in which godly kids were raised.
I would agree with you that I don't think there's any. There's no example that we can look to of a godly father with godly kids. We can see godly parents with horrible kids, like Samson's parents. His dad Manoah and his wife, they're godly and they're following God the whole way, but Samson's awful. And then Samuel, we would assume like, hey, he seems like a godly guy, but something happened with his kids, and we know David, all his kids are disasters. And Saul's an awful father, but Jonathan's awesome. His son Jonathan is an amazing kid. The only reason that I can think, and I rack my brain over this, it seems like the guys who live a life that doesn't, like Nehemiah or Ezra, they're probably eunuchs or unmarried. And they have no colossal failure at the end of their life. That seems to be the pattern. And I think that the reason is that, and this is a complete conjecture, and I have no verse to back this up, but I think it's because we're supposed to be drawn to God as our one example of being a father, as being a parent. Otherwise, every church would have a Caleb class. Go be a father like Caleb. So we would be like him. And instead of, we can't look to any, in the most vital and most fundamental element of our society, which is the family, we can't look to any human being's example as be like this person. We have to go to God. himself and watch him father Israel and father us, the church. That's the only thing I can think of.
So females have a role model. So Ruth.
Right.
Yeah, but males have a role model in Christ.
Right. So we have, so Ruth is, but we still don't even know her parenting. We just know that she's the mother of Obed, and Obed continues the line going on down. But yeah, it is kind of a harrowing study to look at the Old Testament, the New Testament, and go, where are the fathers, godly fathers with godly kids, or godly sons?
Well, you get the impression, and of course there's all kinds of things that are not filled in with respect to Samuel, but you get the impression that he's one of the most godly men that you find in the Old Testament. Mm-hmm. But yet, why did his sons?
Right. So he's godly, but who is his primary example his whole life? It wasn't his dad. His dad was Elkanah, and remember he goes and lives in the temple when he's 3. His main example is Eli. And Eli's a decent guy, but he doesn't ever discipline his sons. That's why Eli gets punished, because you will not discipline your sons. So that's his big sin. His big sin is not perverting justice and perverting God's word. His big sin is not disciplining his sons. And so Samuel seems to have fallen in that pattern. That he himself is righteous and holy. He himself is pursuing godliness, but he doesn't discipline his sons in the same way. We would assume. There's plenty of godly people who themselves are personally godly, but they abdicate one area of godliness, which is fatherly discipline, fatherly child rearing, or godlike, rather. That is our Father. But anyways, that's a good question. Definitely worthy sidetrack. But as the story of 2 Samuel, or 1 2 Samuel goes on, is that we're going to see this king starts to become the representative of the people. That as goes the king, so goes the country. Especially when it comes to the covenant blessings. And God promised it would be this way. Remember Deuteronomy 27 and 28? If you sin, and if you follow sinful leadership, then you will go into the cursing area of the covenant. And you will be removed from the land. Guaranteed that's what's going to happen. And then Deuteronomy 27 and 28 say, this will happen. It's going to happen exactly like this. You are going to be ended up in this place of cursing. And that happens. 2 Samuel chapter 21. We come into a place of cursing. That the king, this is an example of the king functioning as God's representative, and then him treating the rest of the country based on the actions of the king. So David's king by now, way king by now. But God says this. Now there was a famine in the days of David for 3 years, year after year. And David sought the face of the Lord. So that's the right thing to do. And the Lord said, there is blood guilt on Saul and on his house because he put the Gibeonites to death. So Saul's been dead for a while. For probably decades. And God's going to punish Israel for the injustice that he did to the Gibeonites. So David has to go and make right what was made wrong with the Gibeonites. Because there's famine in the whole land. Everybody's starving because of what Saul did. As goes the leader, so goes the people. Which we're supposed to see that and go, we could go, oh man, that's not fair. Or you could go, thank goodness we have a leader that as goes he, so go we. Jesus, right? As long as he never sins and remains perfectly sinless at the right hand of the Father, we are seen as that. We are going to be taken into God's eternal covenant blessing because of our representative king, Christ. So that's how God begins to function with this Israel monarchy. It points to a future hope that the monarchy is rooted in just sinfulness, lack of faith, and it underscores man's inability to do it. Man cannot do what God requires. So that could lead you to despair or could lead you to hope, because that's the first piece of the gospel, right? You cannot do this. You have no ability to make sure that this happens and continues to happen. So David is a picture of what the perfect king is going to be like. I mean, think about all the references to David, even at the end of Revelation. Revelation 22:16 reminds us that Jesus is the root of the offspring of David. Even all the way then, David is this stalwart, because after 1 and 2 Samuel are over, we get 1 and 2 Kings and 1 and 2 Chronicles, which is just looking at all the other kings of Israel and Judah after the kingdom splits. And what are they always compared back to? David. the good kings, it says of them, and he did exactly as his father David did. Or he had the same mind as his father David did. Father meaning like ancestor. Or he did not do like his father David, and he worshipped idols, and he erected high places, and he made idol worship prominent. It always goes back to David. David's kind of the one we're all looking to. His significance for the rest of the Bible is huge. The city of David, this Bethlehem, the son of David, has got to be the Messiah. They call him that. So David's kingship prefigures Christ's kingship. Second big thing in Samuel, 1st and 2nd Samuel, was rest. The rest, like peace rest, not like the rest of the story, the leftovers. So David's kingdom, it finally brings, and they finally enjoy some rest. That the way that they never did before. Because even with Samuel, he's stable, but it's still that time period of the judges. And then as soon as the people figure out, hey, your kids look like turkeys, we're going to rebel against God by asking for a king instead of saying, hey, Samuel, what are we going to do about your sons? They can't be our judges. Let's come up with something. Let's go to God and seek for help. So they rebel, and then God gives them what they want. So they spend the rest of 1 Samuel enduring, you got what you want, but I'm still going to bless you by having this rogue king, David, in a sense rogue, that he's exiled, he's running, he's constantly, doesn't really have that much influence, but he has some influence, and people do know who he is, but you don't really get it all the way. But then 2 Samuel comes, Saul's finally dead, and then chapter 6, something extremely significant happens. The Ark of the Covenant comes back to the land, and it goes into Jerusalem. And then David, who there was a descendant of Saul trying to rule in Jerusalem, so David's having to be king for the first 6.5 years or 7 years rather, in Hebron. So he's the king, but not in the throne. It's like you're the president, but you're in Miami, you're not in Washington, D.C. And then finally the fake king dies, and so David can now go to Jerusalem. So he's finally the king. The Ark of the Covenant is finally there. So God's throne and David's throne are in the same city for the first time. That's never happened before. There's never been an established ruler, monarchy that God approves of, and God's presence himself is also there. That happens in 2 Samuel 6. That's extremely significant. Extremely significant in the life of redemptive history. That they're no longer wandering. They have a place. They're no longer landless, rulerless, visionless. They have an established place. We have a king on a throne who's under God, who's on his throne in the temple. The God's presence and the king are there together. And that's a big idea. And then it leads to our even bigger, more significant moment, because we get to chapter 7 of 2 Samuel. And that's where we get the third tent pole. Remember back to our tent poles of the Old Testament, how to understand it, that we have the covenant kind of coming in 4 waves. The first 2 are really close together, Genesis 3:15, Genesis 12, 1 through 3. The third one is here, 2 Samuel 7. It's re-given in Psalm 89, or re-quoted rather, invoked by the psalmist. But this is where the covenant progresses further. So God's redemptive history plan of how we're going to crush and get rid of the evil one. He goes to Abraham and it says, I'm going to do it through you, and I'll make you a good people, a big people. I'm going to bless you with a land and blessing. So land, seed, and blessing. And then you get to David, and the covenant goes again. This promise goes further. Now to David, he's going to make a glorious covenant with him. Somebody read 2 Samuel 7, 1 through 3.
After the king was settled in his palace, and the Lord had given him rest from all his enemies around him, he said to Nathan the prophet, Here I am, living in a palace of cedar, while the ark of God remains in a tent. Nathan replied to the king, Whatever you have in mind, go ahead and do it, because the Lord is with you.
So David says, I'm going to make a house for God. And God says, no, you're not. And we know from 2 Chronicles the reason why, or 1st and 2 Chronicles, the reason why is because he's a man of bloodshed. Like, you're a man of war, and that guy can't make my temple. I'm going to have somebody else do that. But here's what I'm going to do for you. Because David's heart is, I can't have a better dwelling than God. That's ridiculous. No other leader before had said anything like that. They were after themselves. David says, no, I'm going to live in the dirt before you live in a worse house than me. So, but God says, I appreciate that. The heart is what I'm after. But you're not going to be the one to do that. I have other plans for that, but I am going to build you a house. Look at verse 10. Let's read verse 10 through 13. So somebody read 10 and 11, and somebody read 12 and 13.
I will also appoint a place for my people Israel, and will plant them, that they may live in their own place and not be disturbed again. Nor will the wicked afflict them any more as formerly. Even from the day that I commanded judges to be over my people Israel, and I will give you rest from all your enemies. The Lord also declares to you that the Lord will make a house for you.
When your days are fulfilled, you lie down with your fathers. I will raise up your offspring after you. You shall come from your body, and I will establish his kingdom. He shall build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever.
So something huge just happened. So God said, you're not going to build me a house, I want to make you a house. But a house in the sense of dynasty. That, like, we would use the same word like that, like the house of the striplings. Like, we would know that's not just referring to brick and mortar, that's referring to the family of the striplings. So God's saying that same thing here. And then he says this, he says in verse 12, I will raise up your offspring. And that word is singular, offspring. And what does that harken back to? Genesis 3:15. The offspring of the woman will crush the head of the serpent. Singular offspring will crush the head of the serpent. God says that now, that's going to come through you, David. Your offspring after you, from your own body, and I'm going to establish his kingdom, the singular offspring, kingdom. And how long is it going to be established? I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. That's Jesus. That's what we're looking for, this forever king. Now, the line of descendants that we've been following from Adam to Abraham to Isaac to Jacob, and then we've been wandering, it seems like, for a while. We had Moses being mediator of the covenant, but he's not the carrier of it. David now, that Moses is gone, Joshua's gone, the judges are gone, David now carries the covenant. It's been re-given to him. And it's re-quoted in Psalm 89. So that's another thing to mark down in your Bible. When Israel's in a painful place, a sinful place, the psalmist in that moment is saying, please remember this covenant that you gave to David. Please don't forget this covenant that you gave to David. Re-invokes it. So what we see, so you could read for 2 Samuel 7, and then if you just keep reading, and then we read all the way through the whole book, and we go, oh, what God was talking about in 2 Samuel 7 was Solomon. And Solomon builds a temple, he builds a house, and it's supposed to be a forever deal, like it's supposed to be the one, and everybody's looking back to it, and they're sad when it's gone. But what biblical prophecy has, an element to it, understanding it, oftentimes it has a near fulfillment and a far fulfillment. So the near fulfillment is David, hey, I'm going to give you lineage, and you're going to build a dynasty. So he's like, oh, okay, that's Solomon. But also there's a far fulfillment, like it's Jesus. And I'm going to build a house forever. Like, okay, well, he's going to build a house. So Solomon builds a house, builds a temple for God. But what does Jesus say when he's standing near that temple that makes the Pharisees so mad? I'm going to tear down this temple, and in 3 days I will rebuild it. And they got furious about it, and then they didn't realize he was talking about his body. So there's a near fulfillment and a far fulfillment that we see in 2 Samuel 7. It comes true that David's immediate son is going to build a house, but David's greater son is going to build something even better. Hebrews 3:6, don't you have to turn there, I'll just read it to you. Hebrews 3:6 says, Christ is faithful over God's house as a son. And we are his house, if indeed we hold fast our confidence and boasting in our hope. So all this does is demonstrate God's plan to provide perfect rest for his people, and that David's throne established in Jerusalem and God's presence established in Jerusalem, it allows them to end their displaced existence, and now they have a place to be. That God fulfilled his covenant, that you do have a place, and you do have rest. And peace and justice will come forever through David's lineage, David's kingdom. So that's Ruth, 1st and 2nd Samuel. When will this eternal kingdom come? That's where you kind of end up. Because you're like, man, David's the best thing we've ever seen. We saw one horrible king. We see David. And then if you just keep reading, you're like, okay, yeah, it's awful. And it's never as good as David again. When is the eternal kingdom going to come? If this is the imagery we're supposed to get, when is that going to come? So that's when you're supposed to be left hungry. Every step in the Old Testament should just make you hungrier and hungrier. When is this going to be over? When is this going to be finally fulfilled? We see the nearness of it, and the nearness of it is okay, but also bad. But what's the final fulfillment of it? That's what we're supposed to be left hungry and waiting for. And we're secure as the people of God, that God does care for his people and he will provide for them. Because he has been faithful all the way up to this point. He's acknowledged, he's kept his end of the covenant forever. Like he hasn't missed one beat from Genesis all the way to 2 Samuel, as far as we've got so far. So, the last two things, the unknown or lesser known facts about God. I have two this time. One of them you probably know, another one you might not know. It's coming from 2 Samuel 6. When David's bringing the Ark of the Covenant back into Israel, he does it the wrong way. Look at what happens. In 2 Samuel 6, verse 5. And David and all the house of Israel were celebrating before the Lord with songs and lyres and harps and tambourines and castanets and cymbals. And when they came to the threshing floor of Nachon, Uzzah put out his hand to the ark of God and took hold of it, for the oxen stumbled. And then the anger of the Lord was kindled against Uzzah, and God struck him down there because of his error. And he died there beside the ark of God. So that moment, they're bringing the Ark of the Covenant back into the land of God. It's on an ox cart. The ox stumbles. The ark starts to teetering off the ox cart. And Uzzah, the guy riding shotgun, reaches out to grab it, to keep it from falling on the ground, and God kills him. Why does God do that?
Because he's not a priest.
He's not a priest.
Well,
his hands are unclean
with the poles on their shoulders. They had it on an ox cart.
Right. It's a disobeying God, and because his hands were unclean. R.C. Sproul says it like this. He says that Uzzah's great mistake was that he thought his hands were more clean than the dirt. That I can reach out and I can do this because I'm more clean than dirt. No, you are dirt. And you didn't bring this in obedience to God. And God said, this is my presence, you must obey. So sometimes it's a hard one for folks to swallow. It seems like you guys are doing great with it though. Second one is I think a little more to wrestle with. We're going to run out of time, so I'm just going to tell you what it is, and then we're going to pray and then leave you to drive to work. But in 1 Samuel chapter 2, when this cursing of Eli is going on, verse 22, 1 Samuel 2:22. Now Eli was very old and kept hearing all that his sons were doing to Israel, and how they lay with the women who were serving at the entrance of the tent of meeting. Those are awful pastors, by the way. And he said to them, why do you do such things? For I hear of your evil dealings from all these people. No, my sons, it is no good report that I hear the people of the Lord spreading abroad. If someone sins against a man, God will mediate for him. But if someone sins against the Lord, who can intercede for him? But they would not listen to the voice of their father. Now, before we finish that, let's read one verse from 2 Peter. Let me show you. You don't have to turn there, but write down 2 Peter 3, verse 9. In 2 Peter 3, verse 9, it says, a verse we all like, the Lord is slow to fulfill his promise, as some count slow, or not slow to fulfill his promise, as some count slowness, but is patient toward you, not wishing that any should perish, but that all should reach repentance. So God says right there, he doesn't wish that any should perish, but all should reach repentance. And then you go back to Eli's sons in verse 25. But they would not listen to the voice of their father. Why? For it was the will of the Lord to put them to death. So, 30 seconds. How do we make those things jive?